I would like to introduce Mandy Gooch. She is a research data archivist at the Odom Institute at the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill. And she works with students, faculty, and staff across the campus to provide data management, consultations, and training. And she oversees the data verification service offered by the Odom Institute. So Mandy, thank you so much for being here. And yeah, whenever you're ready to share the slides, the floor is yours.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And there we go. Hopefully everybody can see those. So yes, my name is Mandy Gooch. I am a research data archivist here at the Odom Institute for Research and Social Science at the University of North Carolina in Chapel Hill. Today I'm going to be giving a whirlwind presentation on some of the updates that we've made to our current CoRe2 development, as well as some guidance documentation we are starting to implement to help support our AJPS verification policy. So just a really quick brief overview of what we do here at the Odom Institute is we partner with the American Journal of Political Science to help support and implement their data verification policy. So this means that once the author submits their manuscript to AJPS and that manuscript is accepted for conditional publishing, they are required to share their data code and documentation so that we can then run the data and the code to ensure that it is computationally reproducible and we get the exact results that are described within the manuscript. So this is a very, very simplified version of what that workflow looks like. If I were to actually blow this workflow out, it would probably be about 18 steps with about 5 or 6 steps in the middle that are iterative. But I don't have space for that on this on this presentation. So basically what happens is the editor sends us the manuscript, the author sends us their data submission package. We do a curation review of the materials to make sure that, yes, all the data files work, we're able to access everything, that the README and the codebook provide enough context and information to help secondary users understand what they're looking at with the materials that they have in this submission package. And then we send it off to our team of verifiers who then run the code and make sure that all of the output matches what's in the manuscript. Once we have that as a successful submission, where we've successfully reviewed the curation side and successfully verified the results, it gets pushed into the journal's Dataverse, where we then assign open science badges, the open data badge, and the open materials badge as appropriate. It is very, very rare to the point where I can't even think of one instance where we have had a full submission pass on the first round. Most times, I think on average, it's about 2 to 2.5 resubmits for a submission. And I think on average, it takes about 6 hours total labor hours to successfully verify and curate a manuscript submission. So we've been doing this for 6 years now, and we are very familiar with some of the constraints that our workflow have. And so our hope is that we are able to address some of these constraints. I'm going to talk a little bit about what those constraints are and then how we're hoping to address it with this CoRe2 platform. So we've addressed sort of 3 main categories where we've got these time constraints and just sort of mini hurdles or just headaches that we are dealing with. So in the administrative column, currently we are managing this entire workflow using an Access dashboard. And I don't know how familiar people are with Microsoft Access in like a dashboard format, but it's a thing. It's not a lot of fun at times, but it does still, it's a lot easier than us trying to manage like 8 different spreadsheets and text documents and Word templates. So we do have this interface. Unfortunately, the interface, the Access dashboard, is limited in that only some people can use it at certain times in certain sections. It can be slow. It can drop information occasionally, which is a nightmare, and you have to go back in and enter it all over again. And then It's also kind of a giant pain for our Mac users because they have to remote desktop into a Windows machine just to access the dashboard and put in some, you know, some issues from what they've discovered in their verification. So that is a big constraint for us. And then under the coordination component, so this is our communication workflow, and it's very heavily dependent upon my email management system and the email management system that my coworker Cheryl implement. And so we try to be as transparent as we can, but we can't communicate every second and every step of the process that we would like to with the editors and the authors. And so there's a lot of back and forth that happens that we don't even track the time for because it's all external to this dashboard. So that's a component that we're hoping we can automate a little bit more. And then the computational constraints. So, you know, recreating these compute environments every time a submission comes in, and then recreating them again when we get the resubmission back in, you know, 5 days, 3 weeks, 6 months, 2 years, you know, it can be a nightmare. So we're hoping that by developing what we call the confirmable reproducible research environment, which is CoRe2, which I have named CoRe2 and will continue to call CoRe2 throughout this presentation now, is sort of our solution to this problem. So what we are hoping is we're going to have this Django web app interface where authors and editors can go and they can create their manuscripts and submit this data submission package and basically do everything in this one-stop shop that will be sitting on top of all of these other tools and platforms that already exist to do these different aspects of reproducible research. So the goal is the author goes in, creates their manuscript, submits all of their data, their files, runs it with a Jupyter notebook within CoRe2. We are able to containerize it, and then we can come in and we can actually go through the materials, have our verifiers check to make sure that the output that was run by the author does actually match what's in the manuscript, and then we can then push the successful verification into Dataverse. So I'm not going to talk a lot about the technical aspects of it because I'm more of the archives workflow side of things. But my systems programmer has given me some really great screenshots of where we currently are in the development for CoRe2, CoRe2. So I'm just going to show some of these shots here so that you guys can get a better understanding of where we're going and what we're looking at, and hopefully some of our future steps that we're going to have done soon. So this is basically a landing page for an administrator role in CoRe2. And what you can see here is just a list of currently active manuscript examples within the platform. And this is probably not super exciting to you guys, but it's super exciting to me because we don't actually have this capability in our Access dashboard unless we run a monthly report, and that's annoying. So just having this and be able to just get like a snapshot of where everything is right from the start is super important for us. But as you can see, it keeps some relatively important information for us readily available right on the main page. The title, we need that obviously. The pub ID is actually going to be replaced with the manuscript IDs that we will get from the journal themselves. And then the current status, who's been assigned to work on it, which is huge for us because we try to keep everything balanced here in terms of who is working on how many manuscripts. So having that just be a snapshot and us not having to like do a specific query to find out is really useful for us. And then the last date that it was updated, which is also really important because we do have deadlines. We're trying to get these manuscripts published. So on this page here, this is going to be, this is what an editor or an author would see if they're going to create a new manuscript within the platform itself. And I've highlighted a couple of different sections here. These are some things that are not currently asked explicitly, but we need to start asking explicitly for submissions. So we have just your basic metadata fields that would be eventually pushed into Dataverse, and a lot of these fields are basically the same ones that come from Dataverse. But you've got this section here asking about qualitative analysis. Does this submission have any qualitative analyses in it? If so, that is a red flag for us, so that we know that we need to loop in the qualitative data repository, because they're the group who do those reviews. We don't do the qualitative side of things. We've also got a section here where we get a little bit more in depth about what's being submitted specifically and what requirements it might have. So does this submission require a high performance compute environment? So recently, I would say in the last like 2 years, submissions are getting more and more complex with the AJPS journal. And so we have had instances where we do get these HPC requirements submissions coming in, and that is a red flag for us, because CoRe2 is not developed as an HPC environment. Like that's not what it's here for. And we have HPCs here at UNC, so we need to pull the materials, get everything in the scheduler, and send off to our HPCs to run. Does the submission contain GIS data and mapping? This is another thing that is external to CoRe2. We're not currently set up with ArcGIS under the hood. So we obviously would need to pull those materials out and run those external to CoRe2. And then finally, one of the really big questions that I'm like really waiting for this to go live for is, does this submission contain restricted or proprietary data? So a lot of times when we get submissions from our authors, they are not letting us know where they got these data and whether or not they have permissions to share these data. So we're usually having to go back and forth with them and say, okay, well, can we use these data? Are we allowed to actually see these data? Otherwise, we need to get them out of Dataverse. And so having this prompt here will A, alert us that there are proprietary data, and B, will require the authors to give us instructions for how to request access to the data or any other requirements by the data producer, so that we are able to skip a potential resubmit because of the sensitivity of data in the system. This is just the basic drag and drop file upload page here, which I think is great, nice and clean. There will be a lovely little green teal, I guess it's teal notification bar that pops up when it's successful ingested. And then this here is a really awesome page to me, so curator, that provides a lot of file level metadata about the data submission package. So the file type section here is a really great way for us to kind of organize the different types of files that are being brought in or being ingested into the system. They can provide a file description if they want. It's not super necessary as part of this workflow, but the SHA-256 is super important for us. We currently collect MD5s of every single data file that is submitted in every single resubmit, so that we can then go back and make sure that either yes, they are the same MD5s, or no, they've definitely updated this file and didn't mention it in their memo when they sent the updates to us. So we definitely need to check. The file size, file creation date, which is important. And then this little feature on the side, which I wish I had a screenshot of it expanded, is for notes for the individual files. So you could actually leave individual notes for each file. So this could be something that we utilize internally with us, like between the curators and the verifiers, or even the authors leave for the editors to send to us or whatever. But I think this is really important because it helps to clean up the verification report itself, because when you have to talk about every single individual file and you've got 65 files, that's and then finally, so once they've uploaded all of their files and everything, this is what they would see as like their overall status of this specific manuscript. Because this has an administrator view right now, you're going to see some stuff that is not necessarily what they'll see, but for the most part, it'll look like this. They can edit the manuscript itself, the manuscript metadata itself. They can edit the files. If there's been a verification report already sent to them for this manuscript, they can view the report. This is where they would launch the notebook. And I apologize, I don't have a screenshot of it being launched. I probably should have asked for that, but I didn't. But they can launch the notebook from here and run the materials. And then here, they can actually, they'll be able to send it to the editor. They won't see these other sections. They can't actually interact with the curator and verifier, but the author can send this to the editor once they've got everything ready to go. And there are going to be a lot of prompts throughout the process to make sure that they understand that once they send it to the editor, like they can't go back in and tweak things until we've sent it back to them. And then finally, we've got the verification report format. So this is where we will be pulling from different fields throughout the platform to generate each verification report. This obviously doesn't have a lot of information in it because it was just a really quick example that was thrown together. But typically what would be in here would be just the manuscript identification number, the title, the author, and then here would be where we would identify any issues. So say they were missing a code book, or the code book is not complete for whatever reason, or say, you know, there were some errors with running the code when we attempted it in the Jupyter Notebook, in which case we would identify what those errors were on which lines. But we try to be as specific as possible. And what's great about this in the CoRe2 environment is that it'll be a lot more automated than it is right now. So we'll be able to basically push a button, generate this report, and then we can also export it as a PDF. So we can not only send this internal via CoRe2, we can also send it external via email to make sure that everybody really does have this report. So these are just some of the current developments with our Django web app. We are getting very close to having it be available to use internally to replace our dashboard, which I'm very excited about. But there's still a lot of things that we need to tweak, especially before we get to the point where we open it up to the editors and authors. There's a lot of workflow things that we need to test thoroughly internally. But some of the main things that I really want to look at before we even launch it as our own dashboard is we need to clean up the terminology to make sure that it's consistent and clear and concise, so that authors, when they're looking at things, they understand what we're asking for straight off the bat. We need to do a better, more thorough review, I think, of the metadata. We want like everything, but that's not realistic when you're asking for people to spend their time putting stuff into a system. So we want to make sure that the metadata fields that we are requiring are absolutely necessary. We want to look at the notifications and tooltips section to make sure that we are notifying as much as necessary, but not too much. We got to find that nice balance. And we want to make sure that the tooltips are very descriptive so that there isn't any confusion about what we're asking for. And then in terms of metrics and reports, so we want to generate these different verification reports, but we also do monthly reports that we want to be able to share with editors so that they understand the overall status of all of their manuscripts. But we also want to be able to pull metrics from the dashboard. What's really great about our Access dashboard right now is that we have a huge pool of years of data of this whole verification workflow process, the time it takes and the common issues that we see. So we want to be able to continue that and have that be a thing in the CoRe2 environment where we can pull these data. Not to mention, we're developing this platform to reduce the amount of time that it takes to do these verifications. So we want to make sure that we are reducing the time. And if there are any bottlenecks, we want to be able to find those bottlenecks to resolve them. So that's where we're at right now with CoRe2. I'm very excited for the developments we've got currently happening. And I cannot wait until we can get rid of this Access dashboard. So the other thing that we've been working on in combination with CoRe2 is things on the curation side of our verification workflow. So the curation side, the issues that we commonly see, that's not something that can be fixed relatively quickly with, you know, automating things in CoRe2. These are things that require more of a guidance document and just better understanding by authors about what we need and the requirements we have. So three of the main areas that we have a lot of issues with are the README, the codebook, and the analysis dataset, and certain things within those that we commonly see in the curation side of things. So I have put together in the last, I don't know, 6 months, 2020 is a blur, in the last like 6 months, some guidance documentation that helps authors to better understand the requirements of a README file as, you know, required by the AJPS data verification policy. So it lists the essential information that must be included. We provide a template. We also provide some tips for how to pull some of this information automatically out of the software that you're using, like R or Stata, which is what we commonly see with our submissions or R and Stata users. And then we provide them with some examples at the bottom of these documents of complete and successful READMEs. And we just sent out all of these documents to our editors right before winter break. So I haven't really been able to kind of see if it's really helped a lot, but I hope it does. We're hoping that by giving these documents to these authors ahead of time, they can read through them, make sure that things match up appropriately, that they're hitting these essential items before they submit it to us, so that we can reduce the number of submissions just dependent on, you know, the curation side of things. So with the code book, we have the same thing. We've got the list of essential information. There must be a one-to-one match between variables. Code book templates, some tips for using R and Stata to kind of automate creating your code book or parts of your code book. And then a section on data citations, because we have noticed that data citations, they're hard. It's not a common thing yet, I think. And so we want to make sure that people understand what needs to be included in a data citation. We reference the ICPSR citing data page as guidance, give them some, you know, some tips and tricks. And then we provide them with some examples of successful code books as well. And then finally, we have a lot of questions around the construction of the analysis data set. So it is a requirement of the data verification policy guidelines for AJPS that the authors provide us with the code or instructions for obtaining the data and constructing their analysis data. That's part of the policy. So we do have to verify that we can reconstruct their analysis data set. And so we do get a lot of questions like, well, I did this by hand. How am I supposed to do that? And so we put this document together to hopefully answer some of those questions up front and provide some examples of other submissions that have done the same thing. So, you know, I got my data from, you know, a database online. So give us the instructions, let us know the key terms or the queries that you use, just so we can go and make sure that, yeah, it is actually in there. That's awesome. We got it. We can understand your instructions. Cool. And then we do get a lot of questions about data that cannot be shared due to licensing, access restrictions, or ethical concerns. And so we give some sort of like guidance here, but no examples, because it's really a case-by-case basis for how this works. But yeah, so our main goal was just to try and reduce the number of resubmissions that are dependent upon just the curation side of things, the documentation, the context, basically. And hopefully that did happen by sending these out. We'll see. I need a few more months maybe to really see if there's been a big change. But that's where we're at currently with CoRe2 and with supporting our AJPS verification implementation. Thank you so much. This is the website address for the CoRe2 project. It's not been updated in a while. I recommend going to the GitHub link down below. And then if you have any questions that I can't answer right now, please feel free to email me. My email is here, and I will leave this page up for people while we do Q&A, and I only went over by 2 minutes.
Thank you so much. This was really interesting. This was great. And it is like really relevant for us at Dataverse. We are like constantly talking about you guys. So I have maybe a quick question. You mentioned that it takes 6 hours to review, to reproduce this like results. And you mentioned there are like 2 submissions on average, 2 resubmissions. So does that mean that it is like 6 hours per resubmission, or is it like 6 hours in total? And okay, that's my first question. Okay. And then I have one more. So what happens? And I see that you have actually plenty of questions, so we can maybe use 1 or 2 minutes. And yeah, sorry, my second question was: do you retrieve then some like sensitive data to use for when you guys like reproducing results?
Okay, yeah. So first question, it's 6 hours total. So that's like over the period of all of the resubmissions. That's the average. I would argue that it might be a little bit longer now in the past 2 years, just because some of the research is becoming more and more complex, and it's taking longer for us to run things and sometimes troubleshoot things. And then the second question, which I just blanked all of a sudden, I'm so sorry. Oh, sensitive data. So for the sensitive data, yeah, so it is a case-by-case basis. We will go out and we will sign data use agreements and go through the access request process for most instances. I think the only times that we haven't done it is if there's a fee incurred and it's a large fee. I almost said ridiculous, but sometimes it is a large fee, or if it's a geographical restriction. So there are some, countries that you cannot take the data out of the country. You have to go physically to that court and stay in that court and look at the data there, and that's it. And so that's not feasible for us. And in those instances, you can do an exception. Like the editors will give you an exemption from the AJPS data verification policy.
Great, thank you so much. So we have a few questions in the chat.
Yes.
Okay, let's see. Does it mean that you will be rerunning simulations during the verification process, or just running post-processing scripts that do analysis on the simulated output?
So we're going to be rerunning the script in its entirety from start to finish. So we need to make sure that any edits that they have made to the code, what they are sending us, basically outputs the exact results from the manuscript. So it depends on what kind of research they're doing, but in most instances it is just a simple stata code or do file or R code that we are running to ensure that what it is doing with the data matches the manuscript.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, it's already impressive that you guys are ready to use supercomputers if need be to redo the things that people are.
I mean, and that I will say that has become more prevalent in the last 2 years, definitely. And it is definitely a sort of an outlier to our normal workflow. And I have to give major kudos to the couple verifiers that we have who do run these HPC submissions, because they have to basically work with our university ITS to rewrite these scripts to fit the requirements of the HPC that we have. And usually they're doing these with very little information from the authors. And I'm sure a lot of you know that most HPCs at different institutions, at different universities, are very different. Very different dependencies. So it's definitely been an interesting experience.
Yeah, that sounds like a lot of work. One question from Philip. So he says, great talk. And do you feel like you need a master script for the main analysis, like run.sh, like in CodeOcean?
Yeah, so we've had a lot of conversations about this. And my current thought, and I will speak just for myself, is that I don't want to force authors and researchers to completely rewrite their code. I think it's good for us to provide as much guidance as possible for using the Jupyter Notebook within our CoRe2 platform, and for giving them guidance on how we suggest and recommend they do their scripts. But I don't think that right now, I don't think we're going to require a master script. I think we're going to maybe offer them like a template idea, sort of like, here's a way you can do it. Like, here's an example, but you don't have to if you don't want to. Just because I think we would get a lot of pushback from people, because it would require a lot of time in certain instances. Like we rarely get a submission from an author that is just one do file. It's usually a lot of stuff.
Yeah. Okay, so last question, because we are also a little bit here running out of time. So are you planning or envisioning a workflow for authors to transfer all of their files and metadata? So in particular, can they input a URL for a collection and then retrieve with an authentication token and then retrieve their data sets and metadata?
Not at this point. I'm wondering if you're speaking specifically to like maybe original data files, or I guess maybe in an instance where they've already got their materials in another repository. at this moment, no, I don't. Honestly, I don't know that it would not be possible. It could be an eventual use case that we would do something like that, where you could just basically import from another repository if it already exists. We are going to have the ability to pull from Dataverse once we've pushed into it. So I don't see why that would not be a use case for a future version of CoRe2. It's just not for right now.
Perfect. Thank you so much. And thank you for answering all these questions and for a great talk.